Good morning, everyone. It's an interesting one this morning. I've really enjoyed writing this message because it's challenged me quite a lot. And about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months, I had something that was getting revealed to me, and I thought, well, this is kind of like, I knew I was speaking, so I thought, well, as stuff's getting revealed to you, you use that as what you want to speak on. And it's fascinating, really. God works in amazing ways. Is the fact that plan had to change because, as constantly, it's a constantly revealing process. It's not just you get given an idea and then bosh, that's what you're going to go with, and you go full bolt in a china shop. It's not like that at all. And I'm adding this segment into the meeting this morning because I think it holds big importance to all of us and a massive lesson for myself, which is to focus on the context. So the initial idea that I was going to bring this morning was an idea about freedom in worship by having a childlike heart. And so I thought, yeah, that's what's been revealed to me in meetings that I was having at a time about 2 months ago, through looking at stuff in terms of like podcasts and things like that, and then also through worship songs as well. So I thought, gosh, that's what I'm going to do. And so I'll give you a little bit of background into how I met my meetings and more so how I used to, which I don't think was a particularly good way of doing it. But because I'm not the most scripturally well-versed, I can't just walk around here and be able to say I've got this idea and bosh, I'm there. I've got the information at hand. I'm not there yet. And one day, once I'm well read enough, maybe I will be. If that's what God's plan is for me, maybe I will be. But how I used to make my meetings was, and I'll go for one in specific, was when love makes an impact. I remember writing that one and I had this idea of this. It wasn't necessarily a bad concept, but the idea was like, Jesus dying on the cross for us was a great sign of love, and that impact is still being shown today. So I had that as the concept. I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go full GCSE or full, I don't know, like exam level, and I've got to find me things that are going to prove this point for me. So I'd go on the interwebs, and I would type in, this is what I'm looking for, and then it would give me a bunch of verses that would back me up, and I'd be like, bosh, there's my leading verse. I've got it. And then I could come here and I can persuade you all that what I'm saying is right, which is dangerous, I've found. And so doing that with this meeting, as I say, the idea was freedom in worship by having a childlike heart. I came upon Matthew 18, and it was verses 1-5. And there was a section in here that I thought, flipping heck, this should be good. It was, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And I was like, there's my leading quote, bosh. John, I can tell you all this morning that you need to have that childlike vigour and energy and worship in a way that's going to show that, and that's great. But that's probably how I'd have left it like 4 or 5 years ago, and be like, sweet, I don't need to do anything else. But I know it's really important to look at the context of the verses. And the context of this one, I found after looking at that, and by that I mean looking at the scripture that's in and around of it, looking at what other preachers have seen, have come to revelations based on that to see how far off you are. But, there's people, like I said at the start, much more well-versed than I am in terms of scripture and an understanding of Christ. And so it's important to focus in on those things. And I found that whilst you could take something from that, I was really stretching the original meaning of that verse. And so what I'm going to do this morning is I think I've probably said this before, but it could be my first proper Bible study. And what we're going to do as well is we're going to focus on the gospel accounts. So we've got our tidbit. So who is the greatest? This is the passage that it's all about. And we've got it in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So this is the first segment. I'm going to break it into bits. The thing that's really important as well, and I read a book. Well, I listened to an audio book, but it counts, doesn't it? And it's called The Case for Christ. Really, really good book. I recommend reading it. And the idea there is it was a geezer who was looking to disprove the Bible, and he does that by trying to do it from an angle of I guess it's criminal law, so how you would like back up evidence and things like that. And one of the part of it was saying about collaborating information. And the best way to put it is you're going to see 3 different versions of this story, and some of them are going to be different from each other. Now, if, say for example, me and 2 others, we've done something and we're a bit, concerned about it, we'd probably get our stories lined up so that we're pretty much singing off the same hymn sheet. That's actually a negative in the eyes of law, because if the story is pretty much like for like with no diversions, then it can seem a little bit like you've tried to falsify or tried to create something to persuade. Whereas because there's differences in Matthew, Mark and Luke in terms of the things that are focused in, you can see that it wasn't like they were trying to do collaborating materials by doing their own writings. The fact that there's differences is important, and this is really where we're at. So we'll just read the 3 of these. So you've got Matthew 18, verse 1. I think my big head's going to block some of you, but there we go. But it says, all of them as well are titled, Who is the Greatest? So in Matthew 18, verse 1, it says, At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? In Mark 9, verses 33 to 34, it says, And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, What were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And in Luke 9, verses 46, and I don't know why I've got 48 there, but there we have it, an argument arose among them as to which of them was the greatest. So it's funny. I always find it funny in Matthew. He the other 2 pretty much say that they were arguing, but Matthew's like, "Oh, Jesus came to us about this. It wasn't that we were arguing." That always sort of tickles me a little bit. But in essence, because even though they've got these slight differences in the way that this story's been put across, it's still the brass tacks is there. The context is still there. But this is a documentation of an argument that happened between the disciples, and the context really here matters. So to understand it, you need to understand why the disciples are arguing, first of all. And to do that, fortunately for me, it happens just before in a couple of bits. I'm sure there's other versions, other parts of the Bible as well that you could pull out to see why the disciples were potentially having this argument. But firstly, Jesus takes Peter, James and John up to a mountaintop where Jesus is transfigured. His face and robe shone like the sun. They also saw Moses and Elijah, and they hear the voice of God, but all 3 of them are sworn to secrecy. So as they were coming down from the mountaintop, this is the story that I'm going to construe here. You've got to imagine, even though they've been sworn to secrecy, they've just seen Jesus shine like the sun. They've just seen Moses and Elijah who've been long past, and they've heard the voice of God. Now, if you're sworn to secrecy, sure, you're going to keep that secret, but it's going to have changed you. You're going to come and you're going to be feeling changed. And I always think with this one, it's important to figure out the disciples that were left at the bottom of the mountain. 1, they'd be thinking, why have we been left? And then 2, why have they changed? What have they seen? And then because they're not revealing that information because they've been sworn to secrecy, it's sort of one of those ones where it's like, well, what's going on there? So I think that's an important bit of context. Also, just before this, Jesus foretells his death and resurrection. And it says there that the disciples didn't understand what he was on about, didn't comprehend at all what Jesus was trying to tell them, because they were so focused in on this idea that Jesus was here to establish his kingdom on heaven and earth, to take up the throne of David. So in that situation, when Jesus was going to come and physically establish that throne, they were thinking, well, what does that mean for us? We're his 12 closest. So where do we line up? Where do we line up in this picture of when this is sorted? And obviously, yeah, it's kind of, I don't know. You can sort of possibly in their head see the justifications there that they were putting into their mind. They've all left their lives behind. They're probably doing loads of good in the community. And they're coming under some stick as well for doing this. So they're probably expecting, like, we're giving all this energy, we're giving all this time. What does that mean for us? What are we going to get out of it? And obviously you can look at it with hindsight and say they were being very selfish and very what's the word I've got here? It's a better word than what I've just used. Prideful about what there's there. But I think it's important as well that Mark, he mentions the fact that when Jesus asks them, they kept silent. And I think straight away they realised that they'd done wrong by discussing it, that they'd kind of misconstrued it. They didn't want to speak to Jesus about it because they felt guilt. And I think that that's important to say. But what's fascinating, and I love Jesus for this really, it is really, really hard, but he kind of corrects them or tries to challenge them by turning their understanding upside down over this whole process of where are they going to rank in the kingdom of heaven. So as we go on to the next one, the story expands. So in Matthew it says, he called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. In Mark, it says, and he sat down and called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And just at the ending segment of verse 48, at the end of this, you'll see the full passage as well, so you can see how it all lines up. But at the end segment of there, it says, for he who is least among you all is the one who is great. And so, like I say, I've shortened that one. I'm not trying to take things out of context. You'll see it in full. It's just I want to have things line up for where they land with each other. And the important part here is that Jesus knows their hearts completely. It does actually say in another section when we'll see there that Jesus understood where they were coming from. And he knew straight out of the gate that they were trying to figure out their pecking order. He knew that that's what they were arguing about. And so what he does is he cuts straight down the middle by turning their understanding. He doesn't waffle about it and try to do it in a different way. He just says, okay, like I'm gonna come here and tell you where you're going wrong. And he turns their understanding upside down. So you've got this symbolism of the child here, and we'll get into more about the symbolism later. But unfortunately for the little kids here, obviously kids are the least of us in society. You've got young adults, you got your adults, and you got your elders, and all of them have use. The kid is more dependable than the rest of them. So the kid is at the lowest level of that. Even if they've got the most energy, they're on the lowest. And so why did Jesus use a child there as this kind of like concept of unless you change and become like little children? And the bit that I found in this Bible study, and like I say, this is an interpretation, so you're more than welcome to look at it and say, "Nah, Phil, I think you're off there." It's important as well. What I wanted to do with that first segment, I've realised I've gone off on a tangent, but I'll come back in. Is when you see us at the front of church, don't think like I've thought it before, and this is the reason why I'm saying it. Don't think that because I'm at the front of church, I've got it all right. Far from it. I'm just here revealing to you what I believe that God's revealed to me. It says be discerning when people are speaking at the front, and take it with not necessarily a pinch of salt, but like if you disagree with something, research it and try to figure out whether what they're saying is actually right or wrong, rather than necessarily seeing someone at the front and saying they've got to be 110% correct. So with this one though, if I go back on pieced, it says the using of a child, and I think the reason why he's done that is to basically set them up with a challenge that they can't succeed with. So I was trying to figure out if there's a better metaphor. Now, Jesus has probably already nailed it at the park, but I was trying to think of, if I was to ask you all who is the best chef that has ever existed or ever has been, you might have some ideas. You might have a Gordon Ramsay. You might have a Jamie Oliver. You might have Marco Pierre. You know what I mean? But what if I gave you an extra piece of information, an extra parameter here, and that parameter is the best chef that has ever been is the one that's tasted every flavour of the world that has ever been and ever will be. Well, straight out of the gate, it's not possible. A person doesn't exist. The person's not there. I personally think here that Jesus has set the disciples with a challenge that they just can't achieve. They can't change and become like little children, because they're full grown men. And I understand that there's some other levels onto there, and we'll get to that in a bit. But what I think Jesus is doing here is they're trying to figure out where they are in the pecking order. And Jesus is saying, you might want to hold fire a second. Are you even sure that you're going to enter into the kingdom of heaven? have you even got the keys? Because if we look at salvation, and we'll do a little deep dive on the salvation element of it, we know that it's not by the works that we do, it's by the works of Jesus. It's through what he did for us on the cross. So when the disciples are trying to figure out their pecking order, they're looking at what they've done in the community, what they've given up, all the stuff that they're going through, and they're thinking, all right, well, that means that I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whichever. And I think what Jesus is trying to do here is he's trying to say, look, it's like, just letting you know here, you need to lower yourself in this scenario. You need to rely on my deeds as they come. Because it's not, our salvation isn't based off on our own deeds, it's based on Jesus's. I think I've always remembered this one when I was growing up. The big argument when I was at school was about Mahatma Gandhi. He did amazing things in India, and unless I'm not well versed in his history, but to my knowledge, he died Hindu. I don't believe he had a conversion to Christ or anything of that nature. You don't necessarily know, but I don't believe that's the case. And so the argument is, did Mahatma Gandhi go to heaven? And we know that even though he did amazing things in the world, he didn't believe that Jesus was his saviour and that his sins were covered through the sacrifice that was made. And so by our understanding there, he's not entered into the kingdom of heaven. And so it's once again, it's that idea, that kind of upside down nature, this upside down kingdom that Jesus is discussing here, is this idea that is through Jesus' deeds, not our own, which is completely separate to how we understand the world to be working today. But Jesus sets the disciples a challenge that they couldn't achieve, but tells them to lower themselves in this process. And this is where you've got the child symbolism. And the disciples, ironically, in this situation, they were acting very selfish. Childish is actually the word that I was going to use there, but selfish as well. They're acting very childish. They were squabbling with each other, and they were trying to, I don't know, like try and say potentially. I mean, there's some tangents, I suppose, that you could take there. It doesn't say specifically how they were arguing with each other, just that they were arguing. But they were probably saying, well, I've done this, I've done that. Maybe you're better than I am, or I'm better than you are. Potentially, I mean, there's some leaps that you could take. It doesn't specifically say, but looking at because I've not got a little kiddo, I did have to go on the internet just to make sure that what I'm saying is backed up. But it says that a child will squabble with their peers but obey their parents. So you got this idea that when it comes to people that are on, now I'm sure there's going to be kids here that are going to squabble with their parents, but they're really reliant on that parent to survive. Whereas if it's, I remember, did Andy have a fight with someone in the sandpit? Is that something? Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that I did as a kid growing up where I would squabble with there, but I would be obedient to you guys, I'm guessing. Yeah, eventually. But there it is, yeah. But what God wants us to do is he wants us to humble ourselves, and he wants us to have that kind of, that relationship within that relationship of child to parent. He wants us to have that dependency on him, because he has that plan to prosper us, to give us a hope and a future. And to do that, we have to lower ourselves. We have to change and become like little children. We have to try, but it's not possible. Like, it's just not in our human nature to do that, but that's what he wants us to try and do. When we humble ourselves and we raise God up, we can enter the kingdom relying on the deeds of Jesus, not our own. And that is a massive juxtaposition to real life, massively. Because there's been plenty of times where I've looked at it at work and you hope for a meritocracy where you do amazing things and it gets seen, and so you get promoted. And so you go up the pecking order by doing good deeds. I'm not saying here, and we'll get onto this in a second, that you don't have to do anything. That's far from it. But it's this idea that your own individual deeds and values or whichever, it doesn't really matter so much, because it's all through Jesus that we're saved. the nice thing is, if we followed this concept 100%, we'd be living in a utopia, I think. I think if you were to live that out about lowering yourselves, following God's plan completely, then it'd be utopia. I genuinely believe that. But we live in a fallen world and that can't happen. So we have to wait to see God's kingdom in perfect motion to see this. But like I say, before I sign off, this isn't the end. So if you go on to the last bit. So it says here in Matthew 18 verse 5, and whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. In Mark it says, and he took a child and put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. In Luke 9, it says, but Jesus, knowing the reasoning of their hearts, took a child and put him by his side, and said to them, whoever receives this child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. And so, even though we're told to lower ourselves and rely on Jesus for our salvation, we aren't told to do nothing. We're told to welcome the next generation in Jesus' name. And not only really necessarily that we're all can be children of God. If there's someone that doesn't know Christ, then we're called to tell people about him, and to be welcoming and encourage people. And that's, once again, it's kind of to gain the same reward as what we should have in our lives, which is to have an understanding of God's plan for us, so they can live out their life and follow that same procedure. And that would go on for generations to generations. If this process never happened, and you never went and welcomed anyone or encouraged people to follow Christ, then the church would just stop existing. It would cease. And so this is an important thing for kingdom building. But we do this in Jesus' name, not our own. And that's, once again, to stop ourselves from getting confused like the disciples were, by doing things with the wrong heart, so doing things with a self-interested heart rather than a selfless heart. And so we'll put up the last one, which is basically the full verses in full context. So if you get bored of me doing my conclusion, you can just read away, if you can see it. But I'm sure somewhere, and this is where I think this meeting has kind of gone hand in hand. I'm sure somewhere there is a meeting that I could put together about freedom in worship through a childlike heart that could be collaborated in the Bible, and you could probably use this passage to assist with that. But the context is massive. Understanding the context can take it from taking something out of context or really stretching what something's meant to be said. And it's my personal believing that at that point, I was saying Philly's the greatest. He's going to do a really, really good meeting about this, rather than what God actually wanted me to say. And so that's why I wanted to include it all, warts and all. Because God humbled me in this meeting. I had this idea, like I said, for probably about 2 months. And it was probably only maybe 3 weeks back that I realised that I needed to dramatically change this meeting for what it was going to be. And I wanted to speak this out so I don't speak out of turn as well. I always look back at, I remember chatting to my granddad about this. I can't remember the guy's name in Job. Eliphaz, is it? The young lad? And he says things, and it sounds really... I remember the first time I read Job, I was like, hey, some of what he's saying is really, really good. And then God comes down and says, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, you're yapping away and you're speaking about things that you don't understand, you don't comprehend. So you've got to be really careful. And that's why, once again, come and listen to this with the discerning heart. Question it. It's good to question things, and to do your own research in it. That's what we're called to do, I believe, is to listen and discern it for ourselves. There's many, many times where the Bible wasn't accessible to the general public, where there was people that was at the front and telling you exactly what, like when it was written in Latin and people couldn't read Latin. No, I mean, we're in a blessed situation. We've got so many resources where we can educate ourselves. And actually, I want to encourage you on stuff like that. For me, this is probably a little bit cheeky, but I have to say it. I really struggle if I was in the sitting down, I'd really struggle listening to me. I really struggle to listen on Sunday mornings, and that's something that I'm really, really challenged with. And so for me, my big wins, I would say, of the last 2 years has been podcasts, has been Tuesday nights where we're able to have more of a conversation about it, and just generally trying to have more conversations with people to sort of learn off one another. I find that's the way that I develop and grow as a Christian, is by having a more interactive experience, I would say, with it potentially. So that's where I want to encourage you, where you can learn things for yourself with an open mind, discern it. If it doesn't sound right, look into it. And so, yeah, we've got to check our own pride to do things in Jesus' name, not our own. And I want to set a challenge. And it's a challenge for myself as well. But the challenge is the good deeds that you do on a day-to-day, why are you doing them? Are you doing them to build up your self-image, where you're like, I want to do these good things so then people know that I'm a good person? Or are you doing it just simply to help your neighbour? Because that's all we're called to do, is to, like, well, not all we're called to do, but one of the things we're called to do is to just serve your neighbour. And this is where there's two prongs, actually. So even when I was driving over here, this won't be fleshed out. This will be off the cuff, this will. But I was thinking about this concept of who is the greatest. And there's a lot of people that would probably put themselves, say, like, it's not going to be me. But some people really struggle with the idea that they themselves aren't the God of their own lives. This is something that was in the car, so this is really off the cuff. But I remember this concept of sometimes we think that we are the pilot of our lives. We struggle to surrender that part of it. So even though we may put ourselves in the line of being Christian or something of that nature, we could, in essence, still be thinking, who is the greatest? Well, it's me, because I've got that plan for myself. It's all about this self-image, this kind of like this sacrifice and surrender. It also says as well in Matthew 6, verses 1-4, it says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honoured by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And once again, it's that concept of doing it for the right heart. It's not actually like saying that if you're going to give money, try and do something weird with your hands so you don't know what's going on. It's this idea of making sure that you're doing good deeds with the right heart in there.